right. So we will begin, and thank you all for tuning in remotely in your PJs, no judgment, and people who came here today. This kind of came about, so usually when I'm corralled into doing a CELT workshop, it's usually because John calls me and says, so what workshops do you want to do during this breakout? So we think of topics. But they're typically inspired by recent events of the semester and maybe a twist of something that hasn't been done before. So this one actually comes out, this is our reflections and policy changes that are coming out as a result of an experience I had in fall of 2019 that actually builds on some very thorough work that John has done as well, and builds on a podcast that John and Rebecca were kind enough to host for me in their Tea for Teaching as well. So John's actually done some workshops that are recorded for posterity, because I went back and looked at them, through 2017, 2018, and maybe a little earlier. And he goes through kind of a laundry list, really a very complete list of some of the tools out there to facilitate academic dishonesty. So, and for all the good things that technology gives us, it gives us some other stuff too. All right, and so they talked about some of the online tools in these sessions, as well as it was kind of an open discussion that, well, how would you try and get around, or how would you design to get around some of these tools? So I didn't really want to redo that when we were talking about CELT workshops, but I thought I could kind of build on this issue and talk about kind of a case study of what I did when it happened to me during the semester and how I'm going to redesign the course to deal with it as well. So some of these tools the big ones are some searchable repositories of old exams, homework, publisher content. Course Hero, Quizlet, and Chegg are, and actually Scrib, how do you pronounce it, are some big sources of old content. Particularly if you are using a top-selling textbook, the publisher content is up there with answers. Sometimes it's free, sometimes it's subscription-based, but keep in mind if you're using anything from a publisher, and unless the book is brand new, or unless it's not a popular, not in the the top adoptions, then it's all over there as well. More concerning, and what was super fun in the fall of 2019 was one way. So years ago, I was getting around publisher content, writing my own content, rewriting questions, things like that. So I got around that by, but now there are answer services that will answer posted questions really within days. And some of them are really good, unfortunately. So some of them really know their stuff. And so this is actually, Chegg.com is one of the biggest offenders of this. And I'm going to talk about my experience with them during the semester. There are tools to get around plagiarism detection. They do it by changing words or adding characters in white, particularly if you use hard copy papers and things like that, and they can pop up a plagiarism detector. So some of them are paraphrasers, and some of them just replace hide characters and words in order to do that. So those are some of the big categories, and it's really this middle bullet, this answer services that are answering your original questions in somewhat of a real-time situation that became the challenge for me that I was dealing with in the semester. So this actually happened in one of my courses in the fall of 2019, and so I'm looking at how to deal with these internet tools because they're not going anywhere, kind of with a real-life problem. So I'm going to really talk about how I figured it out, which was fortunately early on, and what I did about it during the semester. Because while I figured out early on, I already had given them a syllabus that committed to how they're graded and what those activities were going to look like. So I had some limits into what I could do to try and get around it for the rest of the semester. But fall 2020, it's a wide open field. I'd like to predict that the course is going to look quite significantly different in some certain aspects. That I've been doing in an online course. This is an online course, so I'll talk about. So there's an issues of how do I find out whether or not this is going on, and then when you find out within a semester, you're going to have some policies set that limit how you're going to deal with it, and but you still have a lot of options, and then finally you want to think about how am I going to redesign, really accepting that these things aren't really going away as well. So my villain in this story is in particular Chegg.com. So Chegg.com does have a legit business. They were one of the first renters of textbooks, actually. They were one of the first business models. And electricity's out again. I know. It's all right. Sorry. John's going to have a heart attack about the electricity.
This is now 4 times today. Once for an hour.
So we can see, they can still hear, you can't see on my slides, so I'm sorry. So, but the big thing about Chegg is they have this database of publisher content. And I thought I was getting around that by writing my own content. So yay me, right? But here's the problem. Up to 4 questions per month can be solved if you pay $15 a month fee that you upload. So you upload the questions problems, and people on Chegg try and solve them. I have no idea how they get these people and what the compensation model is. I guess I just know I have a plan B if the whole professor gig doesn't work out. But really, Chegg has solutions from, if you have, again, like if you have a published textbook, the end of the questions in the test banks, they're almost all on there. I would just warn people for that. They also have a writing assistance thing and tutoring. I actually don't even know like how much assistance it is. Like, I don't know if they're writing for you. I haven't actually used that part of it, but I'm skeptical. Yay, we're back. So, so the real issue here is the solving the uploaded problems and questions. This one now provides the biggest challenge because it says you can't really design your own new content in a semester and think that it's safe from these kind of sites. And Chegg is $15 a month.
Do you know if they keep
oh, yes.
that content in the database?
Oh, yes. It becomes part of the database until you tell it to take it down, which is another part of the story. And actually, Chegg's search function is lit. I mean, they can search. You think you rewrite a question so it's not searchable? You're wrong. I got to give props to that search function, whoever designed it. I hate it, but I have to give grudging props to it. All right. So here's my story time. So I have a fall of 2019. I'm teaching an online class again. And this is the one that's going to make it even more difficult because in a face-to-face class, you're still, time-proctored exams still give you some amount of control over the use of other resources. When you don't have time-proctored exams, now you're going to have to really think about it. And, you know, frankly, in classes I do teach face-to-face, I'll have things they do on their own that are worth up to 50% of the semester grade. So it's still not unimportant in a face-to-face class as well. So I'm grading in assignments in September, and the strange pattern emerges. So we'll go with the question of how did I find this out? So you have these solution methods that are similar, but really odd. In this case, they were correct, but weird. They were using terminology done nowhere in class in the notes or the examples, and a solution method that isn't really probably the one taught in most books. And this was a time value of money. This was an internal rate of return question. To know it. So they had a solution like, well, yeah, that's right, but I wonder where you got that because that's just really weird. And it started, you know, coming up among different students as I'm grading this. I have about 37 students and I'm grading an assignment. The other one is I have a question, and in response to the question, the student gave me a numerical example to illustrate it. It was real versus nominal interest rate. Right? So all of a sudden, a bunch of students are coming up with an example that has a 4% nominal interest rate and a 2% inflation rate. I'm like, of all the numbers you could choose in the world of numbers, why are all of you choosing 4 and 2? So isn't that interesting? So then I begin my look, right? I begin my internet look. So a Google search of the question pops it up on Chegg. Unfortunately, I can't see the answers without paying for it. I know. So now I'm actually indirectly supporting this. So yay me. On the other hand, I have a Chegg Quest, so you can email me if you want me to check without paying for it. So I buy a membership to Chegg.com, and there it is. And the solutions are there word for word. So I have a class of 37, and I have about 15 that have used them on certain substantial questions. Right? So I find, and these questions I actually wrote in August of 2019. So I change it up knowing that there are these databases that have it. Right? And so these are questions that had really were only a month old. Right? And the other issue about a Chegg membership is that a lot of the students, not only are they cheating, but they don't actually want to type out what they want to achieve, so they use a screenshot. Right? So it's, and that's, you know, how you know it's your original content too, because the way it's sort of set up. So the screenshots won't always show up in a Google search. Chegg has a text. Chegg will add like a text written of the screenshot, and it shows up in their search.
Only behind their file.
Right, but behind the wall, behind the paywall. So I found kind of even more because of the screenshot issue. So I knew at least one of the students had uploaded these questions, right, in violation of basically my intellectual property rights and college policy about this. So at least one had uploaded it, and the others, don't do it, Dad. And the others had basically worked with each other, or had actually had the membership to Chegg and benefited from the other person uploading it. So that's what had to happen. So I'm going to actually talk about how I kind of went from there in the context of course management. And then as we look ahead, I'm going to talk about kind of course design, about what we do about it. So let me actually talk about the general principles that I use to follow the course management, and then I'll go through each one of these in turn. So first, you need some clear guidelines about academic dishonesty and consequences. The college has a policy. You're mandated to link to that policy and put it in your syllabus with some mandated language. But you really are going to want to make sure that for your course and the way you have it set up and how you're grading, the students understand what our academic dishonesty policy means. Check for violations and enforce your policies. And then protect your intellectual property, and this is really we're going to talk about in the database. The DMCA notice is your friend. Right? And you can probably, I actually have it kind of set up a system where it takes me a minimal amount of time to actually collect questions that are sitting on Chegg and telling Chegg to take them down, because they're not theirs, they're mine. So let me flesh out these three kind of guiding principles here. So you're required to have a college policy about intellectual integrity, and that wording is in the faculty handbook in section 6 for syllabus guidelines. Okay? But you really want to talk about the learning activities in your course and interpret it. So in a face-to-face class, when I have eye clickers, I have specific language. If I catch you with the whole collection of eye clickers on your desk, you're going to get a 0 for that entire portion of the grade the first time I catch you. There's no warning. There's no side eye. There's no I'm disappointed talk. There is actually a 0% on 10% of your grade in the course going forward, right? And so in other words, it's specifically interpreted to that activity. And fortunately, I already had a lot of specifics in the online course about if you lift text and there is no quotations, that's plagiarism, and this is the kind of penalty that will start escalating and initially. When you do not cite your source, that is plagiarism. And I said, using ringers to take the course, and I specifically said a ringer is if you take one question and you go put it out to the internet to answer, someone else is taking your course, and that kind of falls under the ringer situation in an online course. So this is what constitutes cheating. I was kind of specific about it, and I was specific about the punishments that would occur based on the severity of offense. So here's actually, this is a little bit small, so hopefully you can read it. But this is actually from my actual policies that I had, fortunately, in place, right? So I actually say, if I discover grounds for the following, there's escalating penalties. So I said, depending on the severity of the offense and the frequency, it kind of escalates there. So I tell them I'm going to take an academic penalty, not a student conduct penalty, which is my choice, and I talk about what those penalties would be. Well, what constitutes cheating? Copying from the book lecture notes without using quotations and citing sources, blah, blah, blah. Using answer sites, like Yahoo Answers and Chegg, to post assignment questions, right? Inappropriate collaboration on graded work. So we talk about what does it mean to collaborate? Like, well, we work together. I'm like, well, actually, if you copied your answer, you didn't really work with them. You just took their answer. So that's not really the same thing. Having others complete your work, right? And also from a situation about 3 years ago, I actually have a statement in an online course that if I think you've got a ringer, then I'm actually going to have the right to have you come in and take proctored exams, that I reserve the right to do that. I haven't really had to push that, so I'm not really sure how that's going to go. But it's there, at least it's there versus not being there, right? So one of the things you want a priori is to have specifics, is to interpret what academic dishonesty means for the learning activities of your course and how you plan on enacting penalties. In spring 2020, I've already added that uploading content as a theft of intellectual property. So I really talked about not only are you cheating because someone else is doing your course, you're actually taking something that I created that belongs to me and you're sending it to a for-profit site that is not compensating the person that created that material.
Is there anything that we could include on, but I guess not. I was thinking that if you include some sort of language in your assignments, they can't upload them, but a screenshot can go around that.
Right. And you should actually talk about, because really students don't always get intellectual property because you go on the internet, you can copy and you can copy pictures, and they're like, well, if I'm allowed to do it, it must be okay. If I'm not physically restricted from doing it. So when I confronted students about this assignments, many of them were kind of taken aback when I said this is intellectual property theft, and how much they felt kind of generally bad about that, or really just kind of upset that they were being, accused of theft. In terms of that, which tells me that they didn't really understand what exactly it was before that. I think revisions to our policies make that even more clear as a campus. All right. So number 2 was check for violations and enforce your policies. All right. So one of the things when you have things in a learning management system, it's grade by question. It has a feature. And that's a great feature when you're worried about academic dishonesty, because if I'm grading all of the questions about internal rate of return at once, then the pattern starts saying, wait a minute, right? And so that's actually versus grading like a whole homework assignment for John Doe and then Jane Smith, etc. So when you use a grade by question feature in a learning management system, the suspicious similarities really begin to pop, and it's easier to see what's going on. You're looking for patterns, obviously, of great minds thinking alike, maybe not, right? But also odd responses. So some things are wrong, and they're just wrong in ways like, why would you even think that? Or that's so weird. Using vocabulary that hasn't been used in your class. So often financial markets have very specific vocabulary and traditions of how they talk about things and how markets operate. And so one of the big heads up, particularly for a paraphraser, is if they start using wording that's just kind of weird and just not used in the industry as well. Students doing well on questions that are typically more challenging. Again, this IRR question that sparked the whole thing is typically one they have a hard time with. They have a hard time of figuring out what's the timing of the cash flows and how do I appropriately discount these cash flows, and what is I get this answer for, well, what does for actually mean? So this is one of the more challenging topics in the course, and students were killing it. Follow the college policy. Right, so you have a choice between academic penalty or reporting through the student conduct system for discipline, right? Very important, I think the one thing that's skipped to is you actually have to confront students with your evidence and give them a chance to respond to you. So when I would confront students with the evidence, some students came back and said, well, I thought you said we could work with other students. I said, well, this is an exact word for word thing from Chegg. Well, I didn't get it from Chegg. I'm like, so you got it from someone who got it from Chegg. You did not randomly. And so that discussion needs to happen. That discussion helps for their understanding, right? Because you want to get something restorative out of this, about they come away with a better understanding, and helps in terms of the policy going forward if they really want to push back. So that's, it's very important that you have that part. You can say, I caught you cheating. There's nothing for you to say. I'm going forward. That basically limits your ability for your discipline to go forward because you haven't followed the school policy. Chegg is actually quite cooperative. We're not friends, but I'm just going to acknowledge, in all fairness, that Chegg will cooperate with an honor code violation. And so basically, Paul Tomaszek was kind enough, I wrote it up on letterhead, and he was kind enough to sign it, that actually asked Chegg to turn over the email and the dates that these questions were posted. Right? And so you can actually find out who uploaded it. Now, some of the smarter students that are using Chegg, that are more strategic, are using anonymous email, so that doesn't always help. But we'll talk about workarounds for that too. But Chegg will cooperate in terms of who uploaded the questions. They just want an official letterhead from basically the dean's level. So this is actually some text from the email that I sent out to students when it was time for us to discuss it. So I really tell them you received zeros, questions that were clearly posted to Chegg in the past month by one of you, then taken from Chegg by a classmate by all of you, right? So these were clearly not your work. You did not receive credit for them. I said it was clear one of you has hired someone to solve these problems, and others are conferring, right? This is the issue where I'm actually going to be more explicit in the future. So I was explicit in my email that I identified to the students who had an issue. So this is really talking about, I think, in language that they will understand, that what it means to hold a copyright and what it means for something to be your intellectual property. So this is in this paragraph, I kind of tell them that Chegg actually does cooperate with this, and that this issue arises. And then okay, I was kind of angry when I wrote this last. But this was really an issue. This comes up that we have a lot of colleagues. Some of them are just being very naive about how much of this stuff is out here, and they're probably not here today. But some of them just don't care. So there's what we call deliberate ignorance, so that if I don't search and find all my questions on Chegg, then I don't have to do anything about it, because there's no workaround in terms of the time that it takes to deal with this issue with that. But this is really telling students that you may have gotten away with this before, but it still violates policy, and it's going to happen. And then I actually cite the policy. And so this is the part where students have an opportunity to discuss what I have found. and their understanding of what happens, right? So that's a quote from our actual policies on campus, and that's a really important part of the process. Right, and I actually gave them a link, and then I gave them a deadline. So I think 1 week is an appropriate deadline to respond, and if they don't, then I go ahead and go forward and fill out the academic dishonesty report. So Mihai says, well, couldn't you just put out something up there that says you can't upload this, or would Chegg, would Chegg not do it? I really doubt that Chegg, probably this is automated, so I don't know if they would discern that. But Chegg, like many of these other sites, have the Digital Millennium Copyright Act takedown forms, where you notify them that they're violating, they have your intellectual property, and you want it removed. So Chegg has a form in PDF, and this is really how I tried to minimize the time suck that this was, and it was. There's no way around it. But I used Word to convert it, and then I filled in my name and my basic information, so I would have a form that was ready to be used repeatedly throughout the semester. And then I could just add, then I took a Google Doc and I could add the URLs of the questions that kept popping up. And so that's what they need. They need the URLs, and then they follow through and they take them down. And so having just a Google Doc I could open and just add to them over, coming days as I would work ahead of students really cuts down on the time. And the fact that I have forms ready to go. So then once I was finished with a lot of documents, I would save the whole thing as a PDF, and you can email it. Chegg, again, has an email address, and they have a whole section on their site about how they deal with intellectual property issues. I worked through the course about, and I would notice Chegg responds to every single DMCA I have filed within 24 hours, telling me the stuff is taken down. And then when I go back to the URLs, I can confirm it's not there. So again, I have to acknowledge that Chegg seems to be very responsive. Actually, even one time, even over the weekend, like I didn't expect a response till Monday, and I got one that Sunday. So someone's working there to take these things down. And so this semester, because I was in the middle of the semester, I was working through the course about 2 weeks ahead of students to file DMCA notices on future questions. Because I created new questions, but I recycled because it's incredibly time intensive to create new content every single semester. So
they weren't even up on Chegg before you submitted them?
Oh no, they were.
They were like a previous semester.
Some I reused from previous semesters, but some. What happened this first time is I opened, basically this assignment was opened a week ahead of time, and within that week, students were uploading and getting their answers. And that's the problem. So the fact that they have, right, if you have an assignment that's opens and it's open for a week or two, that's enough time for them to submit the Chegg and to get a decent answer. And I said they responded about 24 hours. So course design. So some of the things I could do going forward. So I'm finding this out, what was it, like week 2. So going forward through week 15, there were some things I could implement, but some things I just had to look ahead. So I'm going to talk through, let me list some of the things that we can do either immediately or in the future, and I'll talk about them in turn. So one is going to be an issue of question pools. One is the issue of proctoring and timing, which based on modality is easier in some cases than others. One is going to be how we design assignments, maybe basing process, building on prior work, emphasis on current events and examples that are less likely to be in a database. So we'll talk about these 3 areas. So in fall 2019, I'm 3 weeks into class by the time I send that email, and I'm committed to the grading structure in the course. I was committed to the types of assignments. They were already listed in the syllabus. They all had due dates, right? The timing, like how long they were open and whether or not individual things were timed. I didn't feel I could change that at week 3 in a course, having set down documents. How they were weighted, so I couldn't shift the weighting around of the course. So that was too fast. So all of these things I'm kind of stuck with when I found out. So that doesn't mean there was 0 I could do, because I did quite a bit, but all of these things are kind of on the table as I think about when I teach this course in the fall of 2020. So one of the things I could do is enlarge the question pool of the same topic. So internal rate of return, I could actually write 6 questions on internal rate of return where the numbers are all different, right? And basically you can have that pool and then it randomly draws one for a student. So drawing the larger pool and using calculated formula questions where it draws the numbers, again, it's a numerical question and the numbers drawn can be unique for each student. So that's one thing I could do in the semester, because there's nothing I would say that everyone's getting the exact same questions. There's just nothing in there. And why is this effective? Well, obviously it's effective in terms of inter-student sharing answers, because it just won't be as easy. But it's also more difficult to find your match in Chegg, right? And it's easier to find the uploaders when they're using their anonymous emails. So if you have algorithmic questions that are unique to students, then based on the upload and the numbers, I know who did it, right? And that's going to be pretty hard, to refute. Say, well, I just randomly chose these numbers that are out to 3 decimal places that are exactly like the ones. Right? Go figure, right? So that's actually, so it's effective in 2 ways. It's effective in pinpointing uploaders if they're using an anonymous email. And again, it'll be less likely to find matches when there's a larger pool. So I beefed up the pools of questions that I had and questions that I was rewriting. So in face-to-face courses, you have these in-class, and there's a limit to this problem, right? So you have to make them stow their phones at least, but even, Chegg doesn't answer questions that quickly in real time for a timed exam. So on an online course, you're going to have to decide about timing. So one way around this as an online course is Blackboard gives you options about how you time an exam, right? You can time the exam overall. You can time per question. So if you have a series of 5 questions, you can do 1 at a time, no backtracking. Each one is 15 minutes or something like that. So, or you can finish in 1 setting. So you can also give quizzes where it's not timed, but you have to do it in 1 setting. So you have to sit down where you have a couple hours or at least, and you can't save it and go back. So those are all options in Blackboard. I've been teaching online since 1999. And philosophically, I was reluctant to time a lot of things because I felt, this modality was all about access. I began teaching as a young mother with the baby. And so I always had this vision of a mom trying to do her homework and the kids going, Mom, what? You look nice. So, right. Hypothetical example, right? But, I always had, I had a lot of moms with young children in the class, in my online classes. And I always kind of pictured, I was reluctant to time because, you're taking a timed exam, and somebody falls and splits their lip, and then there's a giant disaster, right? And so philosophically, I think I'm heading towards some kind of time structure for some of these things to get around it, but ideally it's not really what I want to do in an online course. Proctoring software is really easily gamed. So don't get a false sense of security if you have proctoring software. Like screen lockdowns, all you need is another screen. I have approximately in my house right now, there are at least 3 tablets, 2 desktops, a laptop, right? And 3 smartphones for the people living there. So it wouldn't be unusual for a student to have a laptop and then have easy access to a desktop or their friend's laptop, right? So screen lock software has a giant gaming security component for the motivated. So be thinking about what the proctoring software does and how easily it can be gamed. I think a more long-term sustainable way to think about it is designing assignments. So what I'll be thinking about, and this is really what I have to think about for redesign, because I couldn't do a lot of these things during the semester where I'd already set the grading structure. So staging work that builds on prior steps is one thing. So you really are you going to come back to Chegg each time and hope that they can build on the prior steps? It's not going to make sense, right? And requiring reflection. So if each step part of the grade is a personal reflection, or a reflection about process, for example, again, that's not something an anonymous person on Chegg is going to be able to answer. Peer critiques. So if part of a student's grade is actually critiquing someone else's work, again, you're not going to get Chegg to do that in any reasonable way. So let's say I colleague Saeed, and he teaches an online managerial class. And I was in his course kind of dealing with another student issue, and I said, a bunch of your questions are on Chegg, Saeed. But then I looked at the answers, and because he requires some of these critiques, and he's very specific in referencing in his class, the answers were terrible. So whoever answering on Chegg is really good at money banking, but they're terrible at managerial economics. So this we know. So I'm like, right? So I'm like, I'd get your $15 a month back if you actually use this class. So that's interesting that using those kind of things clearly affects the quality of answers and really the efficacy. Emphasis on referencing. So this is something I was able to do, is I would reference specific models and notation in the course. And so I would reference case studies within the book and things like that. Again, rather than a general question about Federal Reserve policy, that's easy to get an answer to on Chegg. but a really specific model or notation in the course, where they had to use a model to justify a monetary policy from the Fed, that becomes a lot more difficult to get someone else to answer. Particularly if you have a prior assignment or discussion. So if you take an example from a discussion that the class had online last week and they have to pick one and then they have to expound on it, again, that becomes a lot harder. So emphasis on referencing prior things and other things have done in the course, that makes it a lot more difficult for just posting and getting someone to do it. The other thing I did was current examples. So that limits the past banks. So in terms of real-time questions, again, I think it probably limits the quality of answers you're going to get, but it certainly limits searching past database. So I could actually, when talking about quantitative easing or the federal funds rate market, during that semester, the Fed came in with about $80 billion to support a federal funds rate market because excess reserves were running low in a specific month. So I could actually reference, media reports about that and have them talk about it in terms of using the models in class. They weren't going to find an old question about this from anybody because it hadn't happened, right? And if they had tried posting it, again, I think the quality of answer would be affected as well. Because I think a lot of the answers to these questions are actually international in terms of people responding to some of these questions. And so particularly when I'm referencing US financial systems, I think that limits the specifics. So you're less likely to get a strong answer in time, and it eliminates past questions. So here's some other observations about when you're dealing with this academic dishonesty in general, but specifically, I guess, this internet-driven. I did have policies about this. If I hadn't really had and been as clear, now taking an answer from Chegg and word for word, sticking it on there would have survived any challenge to academic dishonesty because it's clearly it clearly violates the college policies, which are more broadly written. Right? But having some clear policies in the context of your course really eliminates a lot of the pushback. I put out 15 academic dishonesty courses. I did not really get any real pushback. I got a few people that said, well, I just want you to know I didn't take it from Chegg or I didn't upload it, but I did work with a student. And then we had that discussion, like when you actually take a word for word answer, you're not working with somebody. You're taking it, and that's not the same. And so that was maybe 3 out of the 15. And then, I had 2 people coming in, like throw yourself at the mercy of the court kind of things that came in. But most of them, just kind of apologized, said they wouldn't do it, and moved on. And I think the clear policies kind of limited. If for people worried about pushback, I think having policies up front that are really in the context of your course can really help. I don't want to sugarcoat this. It took a lot of time. I was at least 40 hours in DMCA, kind of restructuring and dealing with academic dishonesty reports, at least for that semester. I could spend the time doing that and not being worried about my other responsibilities for research because of my position. And if they ended up hating me, well, right? I didn't have to worry about, inter workshop work. I didn't have to worry about what would happen on my student evaluations if I got a bunch of nasty comments because I was enforcing these policies. Oh, well, right. The Cencini stopped after the initial assignments because they basically knew I was by then they knew I was looking. So I didn't have I kept looking for, I wrote new questions and in real time I kept looking for them. And so I would check all of the questions when I sat down to grade and right before the assignment opened up and make the DMCAs and the adjustments as needed. And there are no other attempts with Chegg as a site.
There are dozens of other sites, but
right,
that's
but
the biggest one that seems to be most popular.
Right, but I don't know what other sites are doing the real-time answering because Course Hero is not doing that. Quizlet does not do that. Right. So.
So Liz, did you communicate? So you've got the 15 that you busted, so to speak. Did you communicate them with the other?
Okay, that's a good question. So so I busted the 15, and then an assignment 2, I got a couple of new people kind of doing that. So then I had to decide because this is a Streisand effect problem. Do I have these people in the class going, ooh, there's a site called Chegg for $15 a month that'll do my homework for me? Yay! Best class ever. Thank you. So there was this worry about do you want to let the other half in on this or what do you want to do about it? And so then I made the decision after that second assignment that I emailed everybody. And that one, I guess I didn't put pieces in there, but that one I really tried to have more. Like, this is what is wrong. This is how you're cheating yourself. And this is, part of my, behind the scenes, but you don't understand how much time I spend designing the course and writing things, when you look at that's a big part of a teacher's job and an educator's job, and when you steal it, you're basically stealing something that, it's, stealing something that someone else creates. So, stealing a piece of artwork that someone created and just putting it in your van and going away, it's really the equivalent in a virtual way when you take these things from me. And I really try, and I had this pep talk, I'm like, but I give you so many resources, and now there's this opportunity to do this, and I'm here so much, and I'm here online, and all of that. So I try to phrase it in a very positive way, but just kind of moving forward. But I didn't do it at first because I was worried about cluing people in on something, but I figured by the second assignment, I thought I just don't want to deal with this the rest of the semester. So I did actually send an email out to the entire class. So when I was telling people about this during the semester, I said, I'll get a nice, a bottle of a nice dry white for my teaching evaluations because they're going to be lit. They were not. They were largely ineffective. So the people really angry about it were maybe one of the 50% that didn't respond to my evaluations, or, but I just, and in free response, I actually saw nothing about it, which surprised me, because I suspected students would be very angry. But here's the issue. It became clear in the semester that some people had registered for this course knowing that they would probably get their C or B or their target grade with a minimal amount of time because the CHEG was out there. That was clearly part of a strategic plan. Not necessarily, and to be fair to students, this isn't just about core dishonesty or they're awful people. It's really about, you have these preferences and these demands on your time, and you're strategically managing it with constraints. And so for some of them, they're looking at it rationally as economists, yay. And they're saying, this is how I'm gonna manage my time. I have a course over here that's also super important, that's gonna demand so much time. So I'll minimize the time I have to spend on this one so I can spend it on that one. And it's pretty clear to me that as the semester progresses, some students, were then caught short because they weren't really able to spend the time on task that they needed. They at least, by guidelines of university, at least 6 to 9 hours a week that you should be spending on this course, they didn't plan on doing that. They planned on 1 to 2 hours and with help from CHEG, or 1 to 3 hours and help from CHEG. And so they were really kind of struggling in the class. And, the draw of students can be very different from semester to semester, so I'm very reluctant to make conclusions, but I will have to say year on year, in terms of the median grade, it went down significantly. Because some of the questions I thought, even though I wrote them, I thought they were relatively safe, but they were older ones, and I think, yes, fall 2008, people were probably using them as well, and came up to them. So, I mean, I do think in that semester, because I caught it early, I really observed a lot of students kind of struggling who had not planned to spend the time on task and course. That was really needed.
Who did not plan to struggle.
Right.
And if you check things like Course Hero, there are tens of thousands of pages of uploaded content from Oswego.
Oh, yeah.
So they're
Oswego.
tagged from Oswego? Like
You can
say-
search for individual
You can search
courses,
classes, like if
and
you search
yeah.
Eco 101 or,
mostly
even
from
King,
class, but
yeah.
there's not as many from mine.
Is there anything that can be done as a university to take this content down?
Well, actually, honestly, unless the publishers decide to take them on, the kind of legal, I don't think universities really want to expend the kind of legalese to go back. It's really about, and this is a discussion, well, actually, I'll mention this in my slide here. So I think a discussion needs to happen also with publishers as well. So first, talk about this with your department and make sure that there's an awareness that this content is up there and that people should care. Because at the same time, we're talking about textbook costs and the cost of codes. The code and the practice you think you're giving your students might not be the practice you're giving your students. And I think that is really because when I teach a bigger class, I do rely on publisher content. And I'm finding, what am I really getting out of this as well? So yeah, so that's fun course redesign happening right now. So awareness and consistency. So people who don't care whether or not you use CHEG and the same department of people who are going after it, it's not really desirable. And as a department, you can have strategies about how you're going to deal with it as well in policies. And this is going to Mihai's point. I've had publishers come in and they come in with pricing and I said, why would I use this code? All of the answers are on CHEG and you're not on top of it. I can't tell CHEG to take down Pearson stuff because it's not my property, right? Part of a DMCA says I, under penalty of perjury, assert that this is my original content, blah, 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 right? And so I can only go after questions that I wrote. I can't go after the stuff. And so it's really, I had a conversation with the rep from McGraw-Hill and I said, why wouldn't I go OER if your stuff is worthless?
All the OER stuff's up there too.
Yeah,
but
right.
But at least it's free.
Right, but exactly. I said, you talk about the value added of student practice, but
So what is the typical publisher response?
Oh, well, typically keep in mind the book reps are salesmen. They're not the intellectual property people. So they say, most of them tell you they have a full-time legal department that all day does DMCAs. So most of the big three like Cengage, McGraw-Hill, and Pearson have a legal that probably deals with DMCA issues. And I suspect they kind of pop back up issue. I don't know. But I mean, I have notified them specifically, when I actually have a homework and I said, hey, basically this entire Connect homework I'm assigning is on there. And he'll get back to me. But you can ask your reps too, do you have a direct email contact for your DMCA department? Because if you're about to assign something and you see it up there, you might be able to get it taken down within a few days, so at least when they start doing it. Right. But that's going to be, that's a game of DMCA whack-a-mole, right? Because you take it down and then next semester students are going to upload it again. And you said, how can you go after Chegg? And I think it really had to happen if the big three publishers got their legal teams together and said, you're a conduit for this. You're enabling this, and you can't say you're not responsible. Right? We can go back to the Napster, where Napster basically said, we're just a place for people to legally share music. We don't really want them to legally share music, and it's not really our fault. And that, eventually that didn't. So I think it would actually, in terms of deep pockets and legal, it would have to be the publishers. And one of the ways that happens is publishers are in trouble. I mean, there's major, major pressure to bring down pricing here in their model. And they're going to electronic content to try and get rid of the used book market. So you go back and say, I have no value added to buy this.
Part of the reason why they say we charge so much is because we give so much other than the textbook, and just to say is kind of. I mean, I can see some larger university systems suing the publishers, which for lack of
right. No, I mean, I would love to see SUNY try and go after this.
The other question I had is that, I'm new to college, as you know. Is there a way where students, there are universities or colleges that require the students to sign
an honor code?
An honor code.
That's come up, and it's been, in past iterations when we've been reviewing academic integrity policies, that's come up, and I guess it's just kind of, people are uncomfortable with the whole forced honor code.
And there is some evidence that telling students at the start of a test that the honor code of the institution is in effect has a significant deterrent effect on academic dishonesty, regardless of whether the institution actually has an honor code or not. That there was no difference between the institutions that had one and those that didn't.
Yeah.
If students were reminded of the honor code.
And that actually, John's point is one of the things I could do in an online course is you can add just a small, like, one-pointer question at the very beginning of your assignment. Says, I assert that this work is mine and it is properly cited and blah, blah, blah. So you can actually, and that I comply with the standards of academic integrity as set out in the course policies, and they have to answer yes or no. You have to click yes or no.
And in some behavioral economic experiments, that's been as effective in deterrence as any other method.
And I would just add it to include 5 minutes in the orientation that parents attend.
No.
And throw everything, including the kitchen sinks. Like, this is how bad things will happen to your whoever if they choose to go down that.
Well, I mean, in these cases, in these individual assignments, students got 0 on their respective assignments, and I said repeats will be a failure in the class, so I escalated it. But some colleges too, there's a grade called double F, which basically means failure for academic dishonesty. Like an F might be a failure because you didn't get the necessary points or didn't demonstrate nasty. The double F is failure for academic dishonesty.
That's cool.
And it's in the transcript. Yes. So I mean, I don't think we have the support wide here to do it. I would like to see it, but I think one of the unintended consequences of that is you get the whole "you're ruining my life" and "please don't do this. I've never done this before." And, and I mean, it says something about our colleagues that they kind of respond. They respond with some compassion and empathy to students that are panicking about it. But honestly, some of them are just manipulating them, and me too. I mean, there are times I wanted to change my name to Professor Steinway because I got played. Big time.
I don't know about that joke.
I realize the issue of presenting the resource, but is this basically your second email about, yeah, this is out here, but you really shouldn't use it for all these reasons. Should we be addressing that with the incoming classes right off the top?
Right, tell them about Chegg. I don't know. Like,
Yeah,
right, in this case, I don't know, and I still don't know if it was the right thing to send out the whole email the way I did. It's, I think in my as I go to teach in the spring of 2020, I really just say, going to other internet sites and looking for internet answers and things like that. And I'm going to keep it vague. I got a link, check.com, special this semester. But, that's, because that is an issue, because it's very clear in this course I'm using publisher content. Some people figured out the Chegg, and some people didn't. You have people that struggle on the quizzes, and so you know that they're not using Chegg. And then it becomes an issue of equity, too. And, I don't have answers to that. It's
I wasn't necessarily meaning,
no,
we're going to do just Chegg, but the more general.
Mm-hmm.
Because, high school students also indulge in.
Yeah, and high school students, and I'll tell you too, having a high school student, a high school senior, and now in college. So, with high school students being recently in my mind too, I'm going to push back and say that instructors are incredibly lazy about reusing their exams and assignments. And I actually send my kids to a private school. It's that I would expect more, but I think the reuse of things, the reuse of tests over and over again, and they're everywhere. And that's the other thing, when some of our faculty colleagues, you're collecting an exam, so you think you can use it again, but you really don't know in this age of digital photography and all of that they didn't take a picture without you noticing it at least part of the exam. It's just, you kind of got to go on that assumption. So I think a lot of people who think their exams are secure would be surprised at how much of that has gotten out.
So is there any good way to check for which materials are being uploaded, like to the full extent without doing a $15 a month account?
Well, you can actually
asking a
see if the
friend?
questions are there. I would start at Google and actually see if the questions are there.
Right.
I don't, actually, Sarah Bonzo, who had a similar problem in this fall, and we were talking about that, and we were saying she has a subscription too, and she actually was smart enough to get it with a generic email that she just got, that she was just passing around to her colleagues so they could log in. It wasn't attached to her regular email. But the question is whether or not the institution should have an account to check
Or
things.
departments. Or,
Mhm.
Is there a way it would only work for students that are on campus, that as a university, CTS can block?
I was talking to John about that. The problem is Chegg has a legit textbook business too. They were the first mover in the rental business for textbooks, and others joined.
And they just
But I think-
expanded into other services.
I think the blocks can happen by link. So you can block Chegg.com / you cannot block Chegg.com/rentals, or
And how many students have VPNs?
but
Or
that
we'll
can
learn
be,
about them if they
or you could go over your mobile phone. And,
Or we've got a lot of students on campus that have their own Time Warner emails.
or can use their
Go to
phone as a
McDonald's.
hotspot.
McDonald's has an awesome Wi-Fi.
And better power and network connections.
It's a private company or a public?
Chegg? Yeah, so Chegg is, I think it's actually, I don't.
An academic dishonesty service.
Right, so is it I don't know if it's a publicly held company, I don't know if they're shareholders or if it's private equity held.
That's what it might be.
Because a lot of, some of the tech, a lot of textbook companies, like Cengage is held by a private equity firm, right? It's not even publicly traded.
writing lots of questions in Blackboard or variations of questions in Blackboard
it's $41 a share.
is not
Check.
easy.
No, well, Blackboard
it's
doesn't make it
publicly
easy,
listed.
and honestly, Blackboard has what's called a calculated formula that is far inferior to the algorithmic question of Angel.
Yes. That's why I came about.
We have motivated.
That's why I developed a spreadsheet.
Oh, there's Sarah. From what I've heard from students after my fall issue, every student I've spoken with is well aware of Chegg and studied Blue and have used at some point in their academic career. To get some better data on this, we would be in a better position to determine how to address it at the university level. Everyone here is welcome to use my Chegg login.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks.
There we go. And if this helps, over the past 5 years, 477% increase in their stock and their share.
mean, you can imagine a faculty member, a new faculty member at an R1 under incredible pressures to get grants and published is just not going to care about this. And I wouldn't blame them. You done?
Could you pass this in? Sure.
Linda, I sent you the Google.
Mm-hmm. You know how to do it in this spreadsheet?
I know Jeff's been using it a lot for thinking.
Mm-hmm. I would note the other, I mean, and this is going to be time consuming, but I know I've used Pearson in my lab. I haven't used it in years, but I used Connect for a class in the spring. And Connect allows you to edit questions. And so I've gone through and picked the ones that I've edited them so they're not quite as searchable in Chegg. I can change the numbers around and things like that.
What did you say? It all takes time.
It does. I spend an incredible amount of time on this, and I will. And even I was just I'm teaching Eco 200 online, and I went to search all the questions I wrote and all the homeworks for the spring semester, and I found half of them on Chegg. And so there was a DMCA notice filed last week with them. Again, which they within 24 hours they actually responded to, and they're taken down.
So are these mostly included as with the screenshot with the
They're
print
mostly
screen?
with the screenshot, and then of course some of them too, and then things I can recognize it too because they include it. Sometimes I'll put in a hint or be sure to, like with the algorithm questions, I usually have this parentheses saying, you know, type it as a %, and I give an example of how it has to be entered, and they include that part too, which is, you know, which tells me that it was absolutely my question and things like that. Because there's a few, sometimes I run into situations like I can't remember if I got this from a publisher bank or if I actually wrote that one, so I just stopped using it because I didn't feel I could go to Chegg and ask them to take it down. Thank you. Thank everyone for coming.
Thanks, Liz.